Hello everyone, in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make these cross wire macrame earrings, and they look like this, the ones that I've made. So you have this teardrop shape going up from where the earring finding is, and it's made up of macrame with wire and then separated by the beads here. We've then added across of the beads while making the macrame and then turn them into this teardrop shape so they hang nicely from the ears. Now this design here was based off of a bracelet that I previously did that looks like that. So you can see it's basically the same technique, just in a bracelet version. So you have wire macrame and then with the beads in between, and then with that cross on top of the beads there as I'm making the macrame. So you could obviously make a set of this if you wanted to, but then in this tutorial here I want to show you how to make the earrings. So if you want to learn that, then keep watching. So these are the materials that I'm going to be using. What I have here is two different gauges of regular round copper wire. The first one here is a 0.8mm. This is going to be the base wire, or the holding wire as well you could say, the strength of the piece. And then here I have a 0.4mm. This is the wire we're going to use to make the macrame with. And then we need some beads. These are 4mm rounds, and I'm just using these purple quartz gemstone beads to combine it nicely with the copper. And then I just have my earring findings, so earring posts and butterfly backs, and then some jump rings to connect the whole thing together. So let's get it all together and let's get started. So then I cut a length of my wire here first of all, and this is a length of the 0.8mm of about 30 centimeters. So this is the holding wire, you could say, the strength of the piece. It doesn't need to be that much because it's just an earring that we're making. And then I also have a length of my 0.4mm here of about 1 meter and 20 centimeters, and this is in what's going to make the macrame. So what I've then done is taken my holding length of wire, so the thick gauge, and I put that on my macrame board here. I'm just working on the mini one, just across the short side, because it's just an earring that we're making. We're going to be making a length here, we're going to then turn into the shape. And then I need to take my length of the 0.4mm that we're going to use to make the macrame. And what I'm going to do with this, first of all, we need to attach it to this holding wire. So I'm going to fold it over in half here, put the ends together, because we need to find the midpoint first of all. So that's what I have here. Keep hold of that, and then I'm going to take one of the ends and put it underneath the wire there on my board and bring the middle all the way down underneath there. Make sure it stays there, and then we just need to attach this by making a square knot. So I'll bring my left wire over, then the right one I take, and I'm keeping hold of that wire up here so it doesn't move around, so I know that the midpoint stays there. The right one goes over that one and underneath everything in the middle, and then up through the loop here on the other side. Pull all the way through it. Because it's the first one, I'm holding my finger on that wire to make sure when I pull this tight, which I'm doing, pulling the both tails there, that it stays where the midpoint is, and then pull it nice and tight. So that's one half. Then we need to repeat, but do it in reverse. So mirror it on the other side to get the full knot. So I then take my right one over, the left one then goes over that and underneath everything in the middle and up through the loop on the other side. And then again, pull it tight. Now we can just leave that, we don't have to hold on to it because it's already attached. But then here we have a full square knot, and the working wire is now fully attached to the holding wire, and that was with a square knot. So what I'm going to do now is a few more square knots before I then also start adding in the beads. So what I did here was make 3 square knots. That's just what I've chosen to make before I then add in my bead. So you can choose to make less, the same, or more as well. It's completely up to you and depending what look that you want. But now what I want to do is get my working wires into position to then add the bead in. So I'm going to take my left one here, bring it underneath the holding wire, up to the opposite side, and then pull it all the way out. Then I'm going to take the wire from the right side underneath that as well, and out to the opposite side, and then pull that all the way. So we pull them nice and tight underneath the bottom knot there basically, and that's now the wires in the right position. Then I'm going to take my first bead and I just add some beads onto my holding wire here, push up the first one, and then I'm going to take my left one and we want to bring this around the bead and make the little cross. I'm going to take it from the left over towards the right, over the top of the bead at a diagonal there, so it sits like that, and then straight away back underneath the holding wire again, Pull it all the way through, so back up to the side where it's coming from, and then I want to just pull this tight. So I like to hold my fingers there on the wire on the bead to make sure it stays in the position that I put it in while I'm then pulling this tight. So I just hold it down and then pull this back out. And then I take the wire from the right side, we need to cross over towards the left, just over the top of the wire that we already crossed over. So like that. Then I'm going to bring this around the outside. To then bring that back underneath to the original side that came from as well here. So back towards the right. And again I just put my finger on there while I then pull it all the way out. And then we then have a little cross, the wires crossing over each other right there in the middle on top of the bead. And that's what's going to add in that little effect. Now we then need to make a square knot below this to first of all cage in the bead properly, but also fasten the wires in place. So just do the same thing, take my left one. Always make sure you start with the same side, whether you start with the same side as me, so the left one, or if you start with your right one, that doesn't matter, as long as you stay consistent. Make your next square knot here, but now with the first knot under the bead, you don't want to just make the knot here and then pull it tight, because what that's going to do is loosen up the wires that's going around the bead or crossing over the bead there a little bit, and make it not sit how we want it to. So what I like to do is get it close just before I'm pulling it all the way tight, and then as I'm pulling these tight I'm going to put my fingers on the bead, make sure I put them on the wire there so that stays where I want it to. So just literally put your fingers on there, and then I pull the tails tight while I've got my fingers on the wires on the bead, and then you make sure that way that the crossover wires are going to stay exactly how you want them to. Then obviously you want to finish off this square knot to make the other half of it, and then you can just pull normally. It's just the first one underneath the bead. We just got to make sure we keep those wires in place as we're pulling the knots tight. And there you have another full square knot. So that's now a bead added into it. Now it's really up to you how you want this to look. What I'm going to do is I have my 3 knots at the beginning, then I have my bead there with a crossover. Then I'm also going to be doing 3 knots in between every single bead. So I'm just going to continue here, make another 2. And that's really that's the look I want for these. It's really up to you what you want to do. You could also just do 1 knot and then add a bead, or you could make even more if you want more spacing between the beads. It's completely personal preference, and depending on what look that you want for your pieces here, for your earrings. So this is the second one, and then the third one here, because then I've made 3 square knots underneath my first bead. Do the first half and then the other half, and then I reach my point where I then want to add in my next bead. But that's, like I said, just my choice here. The third one, and then now that I want to add in that bead, I just got to remember to get my wires in position. So I take my left one, bring that underneath the holding wire. You want to do this every time. Just before we add in the bead, just remember to always basically swap the wires around, but underneath the holding wire, and push it all the way up close beneath that knot. Push up the bead then, cross it around from one side to the opposite one. I start with my left one, and again I'll just recommend stay consistent. If you start with the right one instead, that's fine. Just stay consistent throughout, and then back underneath the holding wire, so looping all the way around, back out to the original side it came from before going around the bead, and then take the one from the right side in my case, crossing over, and then I just bring that around the outside of the other one to then be able to come back underneath, and then pull that all the way out. And then before I make my knots, I always also just want to make sure that I'm happy with how it then sits there, and I am. So what I'm going to do is make the next knot, and that's the exact same as before. The first half of it here is just the one to be mindful of. So make the first half of your square knot, and then that's where you just want to make sure to push the wires that are crossing over against the bead, just to make sure they stay in place. And then obviously make the other half of the square knot as well. Just like this. And there I then have my second bead in place. So this is just how I want it to be. So I'm just going to keep going like this. Obviously you just continue the way that you want yours to be. So here I then have the full length that I'm going to use, and it looks like this. So from one end to the other, where I then have my tails down here, and what I've ended up using is 10 beads, where I then have 3 square knots in between each, and also on each end there. So that's just the length that I'm going to be using. If you want a bigger earring or pair of earrings there, you can make this longer, or if you want a smaller, you can just make it shorter. But then what we need to do now is take this off the board, because we made the macrame that we need, and then finish off the tails here so we can then shape it into the earring. So to get rid of those tails here, what we need to do is, you look at the very last knot that you've done, and you'll be able to see that the wires are kind of going in opposite direction. So one is going further towards the back, and one is coming more towards the front. And what we're going to do is continue them that way. So I'm going to bring the one that's further towards the back, around the back, and then the other one here around the front. So basically going in opposite directions, but following each other. And almost you could say chasing each other here. And then I'm going to continue like this for a little bit. So basically I'm wrapping the wires around the base wire here, but just following each other and chasing each other here. Just so we have basically a few wraps, because that's then sufficient to be able to cut them off while the wire is going to still stay strong and not come undone. So I'm happy with that, and then I'm going to take my cutters, cut off the excess right down to where they're coming out from. Same with the other side. And then I also want to just take my chain nose here and squeeze in the very end, because otherwise that's kind of sticking out a little bit. You'll be able to feel it with your fingers. And just do both of them. Make sure you can't feel them. Put your fingers over them. And then when you can't feel them at all, then that's fine. Then we have the length ready here to now make into the shape that we want it to be. So then the shape that I want here is a teardrop shape, and also what I want to make sure of is I have my crosses there on the beads. I want them to be on one side, so I'm not just going to bend them like this so it's on the outside. I personally want them to be on one side of the teardrop. Obviously it's personal preference, you can do it however you want to. This is how I want mine to look, so they're kind of facing outward when they're hanging. So what I'm going to start doing is just shaping this with my fingers, give it a nice curve on the bottom, and then bringing the two ends together at the top. So something like that. So you can see it also looks nice and symmetrical. We have 5 beads on one side and then 5 on the other. And then I'm going to have them cross over in the top there. So just like that. And then we need to obviously fasten them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my chain nose pliers, and one end I'm going to bend upwards a little bit. So when we put them together, we have the shape that goes straight up from the middle. And then the other one that's going across here, I'm going to wrap that around it to then fasten it. So I just take the tail and wrap it around the wire that's going straight up just a few times, and every time I make a wrap I make sure it's nice and tight to the previous one. So just something like this here. And then I'm going to take my cutters, cut off the excess, because it's now nice and secure enough. And then again I always want to make sure to just squeeze in the tail, a little bit that's going to be sticking out when you cut off the wire. So something like that. And just straighten that out. So there we then have the teardrop shape in place. So now what we need to do is use the tail going straight up to then also make a wrap loop that we can then use to attach to the earring findings themselves. And to do that, again I'm going to take my chain nose pliers here, and then I put my piece sideways just to make the loop here, and then go up a little bit above the previous wraps that I've just done, so I have a bit of bare wire between those wraps and then the point where I'm going to bend it. So bend it backwards a bit on itself, so we have something like that, a little angle. Then I'm going to take, in my case here, I'm going to be using my 6-step bell making pliers just to get my loop the exact size that I want, so I get the same size on both. But you can also just use round nose pliers. I'm going to use the smallest one and then bend the tail back all the way around here and then making sure I go around to get a full circle. So it looks something like that. And then to finish off the loop and this wrap here, I like to take my chain nose and grab onto the circle there with my chain nose pliers. And then I'm going to take the tail, and we just need to make the wrap. Basically fill in a little gap below the circle and between the wraps on the bottom. And you just fill in that space, doing a few wraps with this wire here. And then once you fill that in, go to where the wire is coming out from, and then cut off the excess. And then again, we then just need to take the chain nose and make sure to squeeze down the end. And then once you've done that, you'll have it finished basically. And then obviously I'm going to use this loop here to attach it to the earring findings. And then we also need to of course make two of this so we can have a set. So I now repeated everything again, so I have my pair of earrings here. And then you can see the teardrop shape, got the attached to my earring findings as well, using jump rings. So we have the macrame with the beads in between and those little crosses across the beads to add a little bit extra interest, you could say. And then, like I said, I have those crosses outward, so when they hang away from the face. But that's completely up to you. You could also do them so they hang towards the front of the piece. That's personal preference. But that's how you then make these earrings. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you very much for watching.